Right. So today we will continue working on speaking question number 1. Today we're gonna practice, but we'll also be talking about a few other things as well. So let's see, let's take a look. Okay. So before we practice, I'd like you guys to listen to some sample responses. We're gonna be hearing 2 different sample responses to 2 different questions that are structured in 2 different ways. Okay, and we'll be analyzing them too, so that you guys, have an idea, have some examples of what you guys can do later when you're speaking. Remember that we're working on question 1 of the speaking section, which is called the independent question. Right? For that question, you will just get a question that will ask about your opinion on something. It's always a closed question. You have 2 options. And you get 15 seconds to prepare your response after you hear and read the question. And how many seconds to speak?
45.
Exactly. Thanks, Christian. So yes, we do get 45 seconds to speak and answer the question. So let's listen to these 2 sample responses. Let's hear the first. So Tamara, please, can you read the question?
Do you agree or disagree with the following sentence? We can learn a lot from making mistakes.
Okay, thanks, Tamara. So it's an agree and disagree type. Let's hear the sample response. I don't want you guys to do anything. Don't take any notes or anything. Just pay attention and we'll analyze it later. So let's see.
I totally agree that we can learn a lot from making mistakes. First of all, we always remember how our past mistakes made us feel, and since they usually make us feel really terrible, we try to avoid repeating them so we don't feel that way again. We also take deliberate action to avoid it. For instance, last year before my big science midterm, I made the mistake of playing video games all day long. As a result, of course, I failed the test and I felt miserable. But I learned from that it's very important to study and to prepare for tests. So the next year, during exam season, I buckled down, I studied, and I learned a lot.
Okay, guys. So what do you think of that response? What elements did it have? Any comments? How was it? So here's a transcript of that response. If we analyze it, remember that we need to be considering all of the elements and all of the things we talked about yesterday, right? So first of all, if we look at the content, it has an introduction, it has a reason, and it has one example, right? That which is everything we said yesterday, your responses should have. Now, if we look more specifically at each element, if we start with the introduction, as you guys can see, this person is answering the question directly in the introduction, right? The question is, do you agree or disagree? And he's saying, I totally agree, using the same verb, using an adverb, as we said yesterday. And as I told you before, it's always important to repeat or at least summarize or paraphrase the statement. So in this case, he's practically saying the same. We can learn a lot from making mistakes, but he could have changed things a little bit, right? He could have said, we can learn a lot from making mistakes, but he could have said, make mistakes teach us a lot, for example. But the important thing is that he is saying the statement. Then he has his reason. He says, we always remember how our past mistakes make us feel. And since they usually make us feel really terrible, we try to avoid repeating them so we don't feel that way again. Look at how this is the reason, right? It is not as short as I would probably do it, but it's still okay because it's not being, the person here is not being redundant, it's not repeating the same ideas. Everything is important. And it is well structured, right? And well said. Now, one thing that I wouldn't do is have that transition there. I personally wouldn't use any transition between the introduction and the reason. Because you guys don't know how many reasons you will do. You don't know how much time you will have, or whether you will have extra time or not to have another reason. You never know. So if you're gonna say first of all, or firstly, to start, to begin with, any transition that starts an argument, they are usually required to be accompanied with another transition that says second, furthermore, secondly, I don't know, right? Or also, but if you won't have that, then it will sound a little incomplete, right? So you better don't have any transitions here. You go directly to the reason. I totally agree that we can learn a lot from making mistakes, since we always remember how our past mistakes make us feel. Right? So that's maybe the change that I would do. Now, he says we also take deliberate action to avoid it, right? This also is complementing the first of all. But you won't always have this. You don't necessarily have to have it. In this case, it's okay, but we don't know how your responses will be, right? So it's better to be careful. What else? He has an example, right? He has a transition to introduce the example. He says, for instance, and in his example, first of all, what type of example is that? What type of example is it?
It's a personal example.
Exactly. It's a personal example because he's talking about a personal experience that he had. Look at how when you give personal examples, you need to have these following elements. First of all, you need to give some context as to where, when this happened. So last year, before my big science midterm, that is the context, right? When and where. Now, he has the events. This is the body of the example, the most important part. I made the mistake of playing video games all day long. The events have to be closely related to the topic. The topic here is making mistakes. So he is giving an example of a time when he made a mistake, and he is specifically mentioning what mistake he made, right? This is the mistake that he made. So look at those details. You guys need to be able to give those details. It's a specific exam, it's a specific mistake. Then he needs to connect that to his reason. His reason is that we remember how our mistakes make us feel, and they make us feel bad, so we avoid repeating them. So he is saying that in the following sentences, right? He says, as a result, I failed the test, I felt miserable. He felt this way, and because he felt this way and he didn't want to feel that way again, he learned, right? So we learn because our mistakes make us feel bad and we don't repeat them. So he is showing that with his example, and then he has like a closing idea that's like the reflection, the result of the event. So he learned, and next year he buckled down, he studied, and he didn't make the mistake again, right? Practically. So he learned. He's showing that he learned. So we had all of those things in the example. It's a detailed example with specific details, as I told you guys. It has good grammar because he's using different tenses. He's using different types of sentences. And it has good vocabulary as well, right? Because if you take a look at, for example, as I usually say with vocabulary, the quickest way to improve vocabulary is by learning adjectives. So look at how he's not saying usually make us feel bad, right? He's saying terrible. He's not repeating terrible here, but he's saying miserable, awful, right? Instead of saying bad. So instead of saying important, he could have said, I learned from that it's essential, it's key, it's of paramount importance, right? To study and prepare for tests. So vocabulary, I think, is pretty good. The transitions, again, that's another way of improving vocabulary. So he's not saying, so I failed the test, but I learned. So next year, right? He's using other types of transitions that help with vocabulary as well. He does not have a second reason. He doesn't have a conclusion either, because remember that you guys don't need those, right? You just need what we have here. So, is this okay? Do you guys have any questions about this so far? No? Okay, guys. Let's do one more. I want you guys to listen to another response. It's from another question, and you will see the differences with the first one, okay? Another thing I wanted to say, please don't feel pressured to do something perfect. I know that what you guys heard, this response was perfect, right? It has no grammar mistakes. It is completely fluent, no pauses, nothing, right? It's perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. Your responses don't need to be perfect. You could have a perfect score without having a perfect response, because it's normal that when we speak, we stop to think, we use filler words, we make mistakes. That's fine. You know, they are not going to be like, oh, this person made one pause, so that's not, they can have a perfect score. It doesn't work like that, right? The important thing is that you have the elements we talked about, that you are supporting your idea, that you have pretty good vocabulary, some transitions, you are coherent when you speak, you show fluency to some degree, and that's it, right? You don't need to have something perfect to have a good score. So keep that in mind. This was obviously pre-prepared. This person probably prepared this like for more than 15 seconds, so don't expect something like this. I just wanted to show it to you guys to analyze the elements of the and the structure of the response. Okay, guys? Now let's listen to this other sample response before we start practicing. So, Micaela, please, can you read the question?
Do you think it's a good idea for children to help their parents with household chores as soon as they are old enough? Use details and examples in your response.
Okay, thank you, Micaela. So it's a different question type, right? It's the good idea, bad idea. So let's listen to the sample response and let's analyze the structure as well.
I think it's a great idea for kids to do household chores as soon as they're old enough. First of all, this can teach children some really valuable skills that will come in handy later in life. For instance, I was responsible for cooking breakfast for my little brother every day before we went to school when we were both kids. As a result, when I went away to college as a teenager, I stayed really healthy because I could cook my own meals instead of always going out for fast food like my friends and classmates. Secondly, parents and children can do household chores together, and this gives them a chance to bond. You know, as they work on things like cleaning dishes or cooking food, they can chat, and the kids might open up about what's going on in their lives.
Okay, guys. So any comments on this one? How was this different from the previous one we said? Do you guys think that it was better, it was worse? What was different? What would you say?
The time is 47 seconds, and the examples I think it's about his brother. No, but the question is about the parents. No.
Okay. We're gonna analyze those elements. As for the time, it is true that he went over, right? It's 47 seconds, but he starts with some delay as well, right? He doesn't start at 0:00 exactly. So I think that could make up for it. But yes, in reality, this should be 43 seconds because you never start when the time starts. So let's see when exactly it starts.
I totally agree that we can learn.
So yeah, right, he actually starts right on time. He went over 2 seconds. But let's talk about the content. Let's see what Tamara is saying. So in this case, if you guys noticed, he had 2 reasons, right? He doesn't have just one as he did in the previous one. So let's analyze. First of all, the introduction is exactly the same as for the previous one. He is answering the question using the same verb, right? The question was, do you think it's a good idea? So he's saying, I think it's a great idea. And look at how he's changing the adjective too, right? Remember how adjectives help the vocabulary? So if you have, do you think it's a good idea? You could say, I would add an adverb here, right? I absolutely think, or I think it's a fantastic idea. It's an awesome idea. You know, I think it's an absolutely great idea. So you could change the adjectives, no problem. And if you guys noticed, this question is pretty long, right? It says, for children to help their parents with household chores as soon as they're old enough. Does that mean that you have to repeat everything? No, right? As I told you, it is important that you guys mention something in your introduction, but you don't necessarily have to say everything. You could summarize. So you could say, I totally think it's a great idea for children to help their parents. And that's it. Or for children to do household chores. For children to help their parents with household tasks. For children to help their parents at home, right? For kids to help the parents at home. It doesn't matter how you summarize it or if you do it the way that he did. For kids to do household chores as soon as they're old enough, right? So it doesn't matter. The important thing is that you say something from the question. Now he has 2 reasons. So now he has 2 transitions and it makes more sense. First of all, secondly, but even if you guys plan on having 2 reasons, I really don't recommend that you have this one here because you don't know if you're gonna make it on time or not. So it's better to just say, I think it's a great idea for kids to do household chores since this can teach children, right? So don't have this transition. Now he has 2 reasons. Doing household chores can teach children some really valuable skills that will come in handy later in life. So it is true, Tamara, that his example, he talked about his brother. But the important thing is that this example of how he cooked breakfast when he was a kid for his brother, the important thing is that it is illustrating the fact that it helps children by teaching them valuable skills, right? Because this household chore that he did taught him a valuable lesson, which is a valuable skill, which is cooking, right? So the example has to be related to the reason, right? Not entirely to the question. Because the reason is supporting the idea. The idea is that it's a good thing that children help their parents. Why? Because they learn. For example, they learn to cook, right? That's kind of the idea here. Now, I want you guys to pay attention to the examples here, especially. First of all, if you guys have 2 reasons, you don't necessarily have to have 2 examples. You can just have 1. But in this case, he has 2. The first example is a personal one, right? As you guys probably noticed, because he's talking about his own experience. I was responsible for cooking breakfast, so I did this household chore. As a result, because of this, when I went away to college, this was really helpful, right? Because it helped him stay healthy. So he's perfectly illustrating what he said. It's a personal example. But in the second one, his reason is that parents and children can do household chores together, and this gives them a chance to bond. So for his example, he just has general examples, right? So he says they can work on things like, these are examples, right? Cleaning dishes, cooking food, they can chat, and the kids might open up about what's going on in their lives. This is an example of a general example, and this is a personal one, right? So when you talk about examples in general, you need to mention details, right? That doesn't mean that you don't need to mention them. You could say, for example, when kids are doing things like cleaning dishes, cooking food, I don't know, cleaning the house, like doing the laundry, They can talk to their parents about what's going on at school, with the, I don't know, with their friends. So you have to give those details, but it could be general, right? You're not talking about one specific kid. You're talking about kids in general, activities in general. But you still need to give details, right? But when you give personal experiences, you talk about yourself and how you experience this, or somebody that you know experienced this, right? So that's the difference. Both of them are perfectly acceptable. So go with the one that you feel is better for you, right? If you guys are having problems with the tenses, for example, then maybe you can go with the general examples. And if you're good with the grammar, then I would suggest that you go with personal ones, right? So it depends. We're gonna see that today. But that's basically it. That's what I wanted to show you guys. What do you think now? Do you have any questions? Any comments? Everything's clear? Are you guys ready to start practicing? Okay. Then in that case, let's start practicing. Okay. So let's start with this question here, or let's start with this other. The question says, some students prefer to work on class assignments by themselves. Others believe it is better to work in a group. Which do you prefer? Explain why. Now you guys will have 15 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So, who wants to go first? Who wants to try first? Anyone? So maybe Michaela, do you want to go first? Do you mind going first?
Okay. Well, I prefer to work on class assignments by myself, since it's better because when you work when you work in a group, it's easy to get distracted by your friends or your classmates. And for example, or for instance, when I was in a group at my school, I feel that I do all the work because I was the only person that I work.
Okay, Michaela, thank you. It was your first try, don't worry about it, but it was actually really good. So I like the fact that you manage your time relatively well. You follow the structure, you have your introduction where you directly answer the question using the same verb. You prefer to work on class assignments by yourself. You had a great reason. You said that it's easy to get distracted when you're in a group. But maybe let's focus on one thing at a time. The tip that I could give you is for content. Make sure that your example is related to your reason, right? In your reason, you said it's easy to get distracted when working in groups, but in your example, you talked about how when you're in groups, you are the only one doing the work. right? Those two things are not necessarily related. So if you're saying that it's easy to get distracted, like maybe you could talk about a time when you were working in a group and your classmates got you distracted, right? And you ended up not doing or not submitting the assignment, something like that. And also careful with the tenses, right? If you want to give examples in the past, that's okay, but practice the verb tenses, the conjugations. So I feel that I did all the work instead of I do all the work. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
I think, do you guys have any questions before we continue? Okay, so let's do this other one here. It says, some people enjoy taking risks and trying new things. Others are not adventurous. They are cautious and prefer to avoid danger. Which behavior do you think is better? Explain why. Now you will have 15 seconds to prepare your responses. You guys? So maybe Christian?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, from my point of view, I prefer to take a risk rather than avoid danger, because taking risks teaches you many lessons and also important things about the life and all the in many aspects at the university. For instance, when I was at my career at the university, I usually tended to take more subjects in order to um, learn other things and also advance farther and faster. So,
Okay, good. So, well done. I mean, the structure was perfect. Your time management was also really good. Your introduction was great. You start with the same verb. Well, you said prefer, right? But it's okay as well because we have prefer in the beginning. So what I would say is kind of the same as I said to Micaela. Your reason was really good. By trying new things, by taking risks, you learn good life lessons, right? Important life lessons. But then when you talked about your example, you said that in university, you took different subjects or different classes that you went farther than what you had to do, right? So maybe try to explain. I don't really know if, I mean, how that is related to trying new things, taking risks. And if you said that you learned life lessons with that, then tell me what lessons you learned by taking that risk, right? So just make sure that you connect your example well with your reason and it'll be perfect. Well done.
okay, thank you.
So next question says, some people think that family members are the most important influence on young adults. Others believe that friends are the most important influence. Which do you agree with and explain why? You guys will now have 15 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So maybe Elizabeth, please, can go.
Okay. I think that family members are the most important influence on young adults. First, it is within the family that children learn their values, beliefs, and cultural norms. For instance, parents pass on traditions and customs and shape a young person identify, and the family plays a crucial role in shaping a young person's values, behaviors, and emotional well-being.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. So that was really good. Your vocabulary was actually great. And the expressions that you had were also amazing, right? So you said things like plays an important role, it's crucial, it shapes one's identity. So your vocabulary was great. I think maybe that's what I wanted to highlight. Now as for the content, you had a good introduction, you directly answered the question, it was fast. You had your reason too, but maybe what I would say is that you just explain your reason a lot without giving examples, right? So I would try to give some examples. So you said that, like, let's say, parents shape young teenagers or young adults behaviors, right? So maybe you could talk about what behaviors specifically, how parents shape them. So you could say, for example, when teenagers are starting, or when kids are becoming teenagers, their parents are the ones who take control over the TV shows that they watch or the friends that they hang out with. So give me more details in your examples. Maybe that's what I would say. Okay, or you could give personal examples as well. You could say when I was younger, or when I was a teenager, my parents were the ones, or my family members were the ones that I don't know, gave me advice on this or that. Okay. So that's what I would say. Just maybe add some more details in your examples and you'll be really good. Well done. Any questions so far? Okay. Next question says, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Use details and examples to explain your answer. All children should be required to learn a second language in school. Now you guys will have 15 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So maybe Carolina, please. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I totally agree that all children should be required to learn a second language in school. It's a very useful tool for the whole life. It doesn't matter if it's a strange language or a native language. As an example, I can say that I started to learn a second language when I was an adult, so it was really difficult for me and now I consider that if I could learn this language earlier, I could have more possibilities, more, I don't know, more advantages probably.
Okay, good. Well done. So it was a great response, actually. You had a good reason. And well, you had an example as well. Maybe we could have some more details. Some things that I could say. First of all, your example, careful with the grammar. I noticed that at the end you were using a really great structure to use, which is the third conditional, right? But careful with the grammar part, because the third conditional, when you speculate about what could have happened if things had been different in the past, you need the past perfect there, right? So I consider that if I had learned a second language in school, I would have more opportunities now if it's the present, or I would have had more opportunities now. So
Okay.
Careful with the grammar part. Also remember that native languages are the ones that you know when you're born, right? Your mother tongue. But foreign languages are the ones that you learn, right? Or second languages. So maybe that. Good response though. Okay. Now our next question says, some people think that children should be allowed to watch whatever television programs they choose. Others think that parents should exercise control over the television programs their children watch. Which do you agree with? Explain why. Now you guys will have 15 seconds to prepare your responses. Guys, so Tamara, please. Go ahead.
I disagree with the statement because I think it's necessary the television for the children life. For instance, I have television in my childhood, and the influence the influence no oh, so sorry. I got that. No, I can't. So sorry. I can't.
Okay, don't worry about it. Take a deep breath. So good. You're gonna try again. Just remember a couple of things. First, make sure that you read the question carefully, right? The question is not whether children should have TV at all. The question is whether they should be able to watch whatever they want, or whether their parents should take control over what they watch, right? So it's like, should children choose what they watch, or should their parents have control over that? And remember, childhood, right? To talk about infancia, childhood. So I'm gonna give you 15 more seconds and you try again. Okay? Right? See? Okay. So please start now.
I agree with the statement about the children choose they see whatever television programs, because the children need to know the different things on television. For instance, in my childhood, I saw the Simpsons, and when I grow up, I have my property about my personality. In conclusion, it's necessary independence.
Okay, all right. Good. So now you're able to finish the response. That's great. And the content is good, actually. You know, you had your reason, you had your example with specific details, a personal experience, a specific show that you mentioned, The Simpsons. So it was good. I wouldn't really say anything in terms of the content. As I said, it's always good to focus one thing at a time. So I do suggest that you focus a little bit on grammar, vocabulary too. So two things, right? Remember that it's childhood, right? Remember, child is one, children are many, right? And when you talk about like adulthood, childhood, youth, right? Careful with that vocabulary, careful with the verb tenses if you plan on giving examples in the past. But remember that you can always give examples in the simple present, right? You could say, for example, some parents are not in favor of their children watching the Simpsons show. However, I believe that children should be independent, and I feel that it shouldn't influence their behavior, right? If the parents have a good education or educate their children well, then the television programs they watch should not have an impact. So you could still give details and have examples in the simple present, without necessarily having a personal experience, right? To avoid making those grammar errors. But it was good. Thank you, Tamara. So, any questions so far? Hey guys, this question here says, some people believe that it's essential for a person's education to learn to play a musical instrument. Others don't believe music education is important. Which view do you agree with? Explain why. Now you guys will have 15 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay. So, who wants to go? Any volunteers? Does anyone want to try this one?
Maybe I could do it.
Yes, of course, Christian. Go ahead, please.
Okay. In my opinion, I don't think that learning to play a musical instrument is essential. I think that it should be optional for children because every person and child has different aptitudes and preferences about subjects, and also has or have different skills. Um, and for instance, when I was a child, I didn't learn to play a musical instrument. However, I was very good at mathematics or physics, and I also could develop my memory and my mathematical skills.
Okay, perfect. That was a perfect response, Christian. Well done. So
Mhm.
starting your introduction, your reason was great. Your example, you had specific details. I love the transitions you used. The grammar was good as well. So I don't think I have any comments. Your example this time was really related to what you said. People have different skills, different abilities, different aptitudes for things. And you talked about that in your example, right? How you were inclined towards one area, you focused on that. And so, yeah, everything was great. Maybe one tiny comment I'd make that didn't really affect your response, but as a suggestion, try to maybe go faster with your introduction, right? This time you took 15 seconds, but it was because you said that you don't agree that learning to play an instrument is essential. But then you continued saying, right? You said that you think that it should be optional. So maybe leave that part. Stick to what the statement says. And then if you have extra time at the end, you could say, therefore, I believe that this should be optional, right? But in the beginning, your introduction, try to make it 8 seconds at most, and so that you have more time to say whatever you want to say. And then at the end, if you wanted to say something else for the intro, you could say it as a conclusion if you have time, right?
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure. So, any questions so far? Okay, guys, let's do this one. It says, when looking for information for a research project, some students prefer to get their information mainly from the internet. Others prefer to mainly use printed materials, such as books and academic journals. Which do you prefer and why? Now you guys will have 15 seconds to prepare your responses. Okay, guys. So, anyone that wants to go? Any other volunteer?
Maybe I try, please.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I prefer the internet first for research project because I find all on the internet. For instance, for my thesis for university, I need the principal information for therefore like a titles of books, and not necessarily the text free on the internet, but the titles, the essays or books, when I can to find the library. In conclusion, the internet is a first. Sorry, but my conclusion is not finished.
Okay, remember you don't need a conclusion, right? So no problem if you don't have one. So good, you said that you can find everything on the internet, everything you need. And you had a good example as well, a very specific example. Your final project for university. You talked about what type of information you need, right? Maybe always emphasize that that information is on the internet. And you could, try to slightly or somehow compare it to the other option, because one could say that you can find the information on the internet, but you could also find it on printed materials, right? So tell me why really it's better to use the internet. You could say, maybe, always, as I said yesterday, right? One tip that I can give you is like, try to subtly compare, So if you're saying that you can find a lot of information on the internet, instead of saying that, you could say, I prefer using the internet as a main source of information, since you can find more information on the internet, right? Instead of saying a lot, you say more, and that way you are comparing to printed materials. And then tell me that maybe there are more information on the internet, right? Even if it's not true, even if it's not like that, you could say. So maybe that's what I could say so that it's more understandable. Careful with vocabulary as well. Remember main instead of principal. And instead of saying I found all information, you find, yes, all the information you need, right? You find everything. Careful with those two words, all versus everything. But it was good. Well done, Tamara. So, any questions so far up until this point? Okay, guys. So before we go, there are some other things that we have to do and we have to say for this question here. So don't worry, we're not done yet. We're gonna see a couple more things. We're gonna see some tips from the ETS so that you guys see exactly what the ETS says. We're gonna see some ideas for your introductions, for your reasons, and so forth. But before we go, what I wanted to do is talk about the topics that you guys can find in the questions. And as you probably noticed, right, most of the time, you guys will find one of these. So you will have questions that are about education. You've seen a lot of those questions today, things like working on class assignments on your own, working in a group, preparing for exams, learning to play instruments, learning a second language. All of that is related to education, culture. Work life is another thing that we haven't seen too much. We're gonna see tomorrow. So things like working alone, changing companies, being in one company, I don't know, like co-workers and stuff. Relationships is another thing. We've seen a couple of questions, like the one that was about family members having an influence on young adults versus friends having an influence on them. Like being engaged, for how long should somebody be engaged, that type of thing. Not necessarily romantic relationships, right? But any type of relationships, including friendships, family members, professional relationships, relationships with colleagues and stuff. Recreation and travel and entertainment is another thing. So things like, I don't know, like traveling alone versus traveling with a companion, the way to entertain oneself by doing, maybe by taking risks, doing extreme sports, anything like that, right? Also music, art, that type of thing. Books, movies. Lifestyle and health is mostly related to working out, being in shape, going on diets, eating habits, that type of thing, everything that has to do with health. Most of the time, you guys will see those topics, but there are also going to be other times when you have some things that are maybe a little bit more complicated, that perhaps require much thought or more vocabulary, more specific vocabulary. So for example, you're going to find some questions that are about technology, like the effects of technology, positive, negative, I don't know, cell phones, social media. You're also going to find some simple finance decisions. So these are personal finance decisions, right? I'm not talking about like global economics or anything, but instead things like, do you think that it's better to save money or to spend it all? Or do you think that it's a good idea for children to learn how to use money? That type of thing. The environment is another common topic sometimes. Things like usually policies to protect the environment, right? Do you think it's a good idea for, I don't know, for companies to reduce their emissions in a way, or do you think that it's a good idea for private cars not to be allowed? Global issues. So again, this is not going to be anything complicated either. When I say global issues, maybe something related to violence, the police, and it's the same with social and political issues, right? It's not going to be hardcore politics, but it will be some, like, for example, I remember one question that was, do you think that the government should rule for 2 to 4 years, or should the government be allowed to rule for more than that? So that type of thing, right? It won't be anything too complicated either, but there are some questions on those areas. We have seen most of these ones. We are going to see other questions tomorrow. We're probably going to increase the difficulty a little bit, and we'll talk about some strategies to deal with these difficult questions, perhaps. The good thing is that most of the questions are the same, right? And once you know these, you can start using the same reasons for more than one question. And we'll talk about that tomorrow as well. I'll share with you guys my reason sheet, which is basically a document where you can start writing all the reasons that you feel could be used for more than one question. And there are actually 5 big reasons that you can always use for each question. So we'll talk about those things tomorrow as well. And we'll continue practicing, okay? So don't worry if you feel that you still need some more practice, because we'll continue practicing tomorrow. But what do you guys think so far? Are there any questions, any comments, anything to say?
Well, I have a question about the 15-minute calls or sessions. Are we also going to practice there? Maybe the independent or other speaking questions or writing questions, or how are they going to work these sessions?
Okay, great question, Christian. So yes, some of you guys have actually already started the sessions. But basically, yes, it's exactly like what we did today, but it's gonna be one-on-one, so it's just gonna be you practicing. So you have time to do more than just a couple of questions like in class, right? Because it's just you. So we'll do that. I'll be giving you some more customized feedback, and we'll work on the 4 questions of the speaking section. This is just question 1, but during the speaking sessions, we'll be working on the 4 of them.
Okay, thank you.
Think any other question? Okay, guys, awesome. Then please don't forget before you go, today we actually have to do 2 surveys. So I'm please sending you the first one now. And when you guys are done with that one, I will send you the other one too. So please don't go yet. Okay, guys, thanks. Now I'm sending you the other one as well. And once you're done with that, you can go. I'll see you guys tomorrow in class. Bye, guys. Take care.